So the next topic it's about innovation in the Quran, and this should be really interesting and a good topic to discuss for us, because this is something that all of us Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created us with this ability to transform things, to innovate, to design, and to transform the earth. And it's not only us; it's also other creatures of Allah have been given this power. And so we would like to invite Dr. Basma Abdelgafar to discuss this idea, this topic from the perspective of the Quran. Please.
So, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I guess it has not. I thought it was here. It has not gone unnoticed that I am melting. And that has nothing to do with the air conditioning or the airflow. It is just a condition of adult females approaching 50. So, alhamdulillah, I don't want you to worry. Exactly. So today we're going to be discussing innovation in the Quran. And if there's absolutely anything I want to achieve today is to excite you about the possibilities that exist in this book. So we had some really interesting questions in the last session. One of them coming from, what would an engineer do and what does an engineer require? Well, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala promised us in the Quran that He has simplified the Quran. He's facilitated the Quran lidhikr, for remembrance, for reading, for understanding, for memorizing. The Quran is a complex work, but it is also a very facilitated work. And there is a reason for that. It has multiple techniques to enable you to learn, because Allah is the best teacher. There is no teacher that is more skilled than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So for you to look to humans to teach you the book of Allah means you have not tried to approach it yourself. There are techniques in the Quran, like metaphors, storytelling, dialogue, commands, repetition, melody, so many techniques that are inherent to the book itself that are Allah's way of teaching, particularly the adult mind. The Quran challenges us. It tells us to observe. It tells us to question. All of these things are modes of teaching. They're a form of pedagogy or andragogy if you're looking at adults. So that's an important point to make. So what I'm going to do today is talk to you in particular about innovation. We're going to touch on the idea of knowledge. So the first thing we're going to do is talk about a maqasidi worldview. I'm going to give you a little bit of a peek into my mind. So what this methodology and our way of thinking at the Maqasid Institute has enabled me, how it's enabled me to view the world. So that's the first thing we're going to consider. The second point, and coming out of that, because if I don't give you the worldview, and I jump into the issue or the topic of innovation right away, you're going to be struggling to understand where I'm coming from. Where does this fit in the world that you are familiar with? I don't want you to put it in the world that you are familiar with. I want you to understand that when you change your worldview, when you augment the way you see reality, the way you understand truth, and they're two different things, that you will be able to situate these new understandings more smoothly in ways that you wouldn't be able to do if you did not augment that bigger picture, or in Islamic terminology, tasawwur. So from there we're going to define knowledge, and then we're going to examine innovation. And of course we're doing this in the time that we have today. This is a topic, of course, that would not only take one course, it is something that I have written a thesis about, so 20 years ago. So we're going to examine innovation. We're going to say, where is this in the Quran? Why does it occur? What makes it possible? And what is the nature of the guidance associated with innovation? So let's look at the worldview. And this is a look into my mind. This is a maqasidi, my tasawwur of the world from my studies. At the top of this entire tasawwur or picture is the idea of tawheed Allah. And this, of course, is the oneness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And under that tawheed, we have the unity of creation. Now, the unity of creation, believe it or not, is something designed in your minds. we as human beings tend towards unity. If we didn't, you would not be able to make out that this is a room. It's your mind that is telling you this is a room. You're bringing all the elements together and you're saying this is a room. You're looking at this object and you think it's a table. You're looking at this and it's a computer. But it's your mind that's doing that for you. We have a tendency, because of Allah's mercy, subhanahu wa ta'ala, that we look for unity so we can make sense of the world around us. I put together whatever, I see your eyes, your eyebrows, your hair, I'm looking at a head. My mind is telling me, I don't even have to think that consciously, but that's what your mind does for you. So the unity of creation is something ingrained within us. Now, the unity of creation has three big elements. The first is purpose. Creation is purposeful. Every element in creation is purposeful. The second element of the unity of creation is connection. Absolutely everything that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created is connected. And the last is holism. When we look at the purposefulness and these connections, they come together in comprehensive units. And then obviously the ultimate, which is the entirety of the universe, which is something obviously that we cannot fathom. We can always fathom just parts of it. But this is the worldview. So out of purpose, what is the highest purpose, or the purpose for believers? Of course, that's what we're talking about today. So our purpose, the purpose of believers, the purpose of everything that Allah created is worship. Now, worship can happen in two ways. One is through glorification, tasbih, and prayer or salah, or it can happen in the form of obedience to the command. We're obeying Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And obedience is either willful or it's decreed. Taran aw karhan. Yeah, you're either willing to be obedient, you're coming voluntarily, or it is something decreed upon you. And karhan does not mean hatefully or in angst. It simply means decreed. So when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that your mother carried you karhan ala karha, this does not mean she was coerced or she hated being pregnant or she hated having a baby. It simply means there was something decreed on women, and that's the end of it. So that explanation explains what we mean by karhan. It doesn't come from to hate. Now the willful then has to come through two ways. It either comes through fiqh, and by fiqh I mean broadly understanding. I do not mean traditional classical fiqh. Or it comes through inspiration. Those are the two forms that you can perform something willfully as a believer. Either you go out and you try to understand what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted of you, or somehow you are inspired. And this goes for all creation as well. This is not just for us. So creation, it also willfully bows to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and submits to His command. And they do it through inspiration. Humans might do it through both. We try to understand, and some of us, obviously the prophets were inspired, and some humans in history may have received some, like the mother of Musa, for instance. She was inspired as well, and others. In terms of connection, we have two forms of connection. The first is moral connection, moral religious, because in Islam, the religious has to be moral and the moral has to be religious. There's no separation in Islam. And this is based on relationships defined by mercy. The second is material. So connection is either moral or material. Morally, there are three forms of relationships. Materially is what I'm talking about when I say a table or a computer, or the way even you're put together as a human being. This is physical ways that elements come together. They're connected. But morally, in Islam, there are three big connections. The first connection is a dependent connection, and that is all of creation toward Allah. It is a one-way. We are dependent on Him. He is not dependent on us. That is a one-way relationship, but of course, there's mutuality in it. So the more we are dependent on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the more we receive from Him as well in terms of barakah and love and ata and all of these things, and growth, and inshallah, Jannah in the hereafter. Then we have an intradependent relationship. Now the intradependent relationship is the relationship first between you and yourself. So everything about you, your intellect, your emotions, your psychology, and your will. So what you want to do in this lifetime through fiqh, and if you're lucky enough through some inspiration, is strengthen that will so that you overcome your other elements and your other faculties, the things that you should control through it. So I'm upset today, but I'm not going to be rude. You know, so something in me tells me, I'm really tired today, but I have a duty to go take care of my mother, right? There's something in you. There is that reason or that will within you that overrides your other faculties. That's the relationship between you and yourself, and that is an interdependent relationship. The other interdependent relationship in the Qur'an, and the brilliant scholar that drew my attention to this was the late Dr. Mona Abul Fadl, which is the fact that in the Qur'an, men and women are intradependent. Ba'dukum min ba'd. We are intradependent. We're not interdependent. We are one unit. We are intradependent. The mu'mineen are like a bunyan. They are together as one unit. They are not separate. So this is very important. It goes back to some of what Dr. Jesser was saying about the way we perceive gender equality and this battle between men and women and injustice. The Muslim mind has a different way of viewing the male-female relationship. Whether we actualize it in real life is another thing. That's something we have to deal with. That's something we have to improve. But the fact that in the Quran, in Islam, men and women are interdependent. And finally, the third relationship we have in this tasawwur with everything is interdependence. And that is between you, the believers, and all of the rest of creation. Now, you'll notice that there's one relationship there that is not up there, which is independence. All right? Now, the Quran does something beautiful. The Quran does not talk about anything that does not exist in reality. Independence does not exist in reality. Individuality does. Do not confuse being an individual with being independent. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told us that He created us from alaq. This is from the very beginning. خَلَقَ الْإِنسَانَ مِنْ عَلَقٍ. Alaq is something that clings, something that is dependent. From your very inception, you will not come into being if you are not dependent. First on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then on your mother's womb, then on coming out, then on your family, then your extended family, then on finding work, then on being in society. You cannot be independent in this life. So this is not a relationship that we have in the Quran because it simply does not exist. The third element in this tasawwur, or in my mind when I think of the bigger picture, is holism. And holism is when all of this comes together. So it's constructive. The connections, the purposefulness, all of these elements, these relationships, the material, the non-material, the seen and the unseen, all of these things come together in a constructive way. The second natural understanding that emerges from that is diversity. The world is comprised of diversity. Diversity of humans, diversity of elements, diversity of interests, both physical and non-physical diversity. That's something we have to acclimate to. Diversity of opinions. The third is that it all comes in measure and balance. Now, if we're talking about connection and we're talking about constructive, then it has to be measured and it has to be balanced. If something is off, it is going to affect our perception of holism. It's going to affect our perception of comprehensiveness. It's going to affect the way that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala intended for something to be whole. So that is a really major summary of a tasawwur that comes out of a Quranic worldview. Now, out of that then, we're going to talk about knowledge. And I wanted first to talk about knowledge in the world in which we live, before I talk about knowledge in the Quran. Now, knowledge in the world in which we live, as most of you know, is really comprised of facts, information, and certain understandings that are generated largely by humans. And we tend, at least in policy, to treat knowledge as a public good. So it's something that's produced for the benefit of society, and it is not normally something from which we derive profit. But we're living in times where everything is being commodified. Even knowledge is being commodified. And the problem with that is how knowledge is understood. So knowledge is understood through three main features. And these come from the economic literature because that is really what has been defining how knowledge is perceived. So if you think about, for instance, the development of the vaccine for COVID, you will see how knowledge was commodified. You will see how certain developers reached the vaccine earlier than others, but the world still didn't have access to it, because the idea was that knowledge is a commodity. It is not a truth. It is not something to be shared. It is a business proposition. And the difficulty with that are the characteristics of knowledge, the sunnan around knowledge. And even economics has recognized this. They don't recognize them as sunnan, but they recognize them as challenges. Challenges to how we can privatize knowledge. The first is indivisibility. So basically acquiring one unit of knowledge, an idea. If I give you an idea today, you can use it repeatedly at no cost. You don't have to invite me again. You don't have to serve me a cup of coffee. You don't have to worry about the fact that I'm melting. You can keep using that example over and over. It's not going to cost you anything, okay? The second is uncertainty. And the uncertainty is the fact that we're not sure of how much we have to invest to achieve an outcome. So I'm here giving you this lecture, and I really don't know if it's going to impact you or not. I have no idea. And so part of it is uncertainty. So I'm here putting in all this effort, thought about this lecture, but I really don't know when I leave what it's going to mean to anybody. And finally, inappropriability. And that means that in the absence of legal protection, it's difficult or impossible for me to appropriate any of the returns generated by the investment that I put, for example, in this lecture. Okay, so it's inappropriable. Once I've given this lecture, there's no way you guys can take it and you can put it on YouTube, and you know if it's that good anyway. And there's no way I can stop that. It's inappropriable, right? So that is the third challenge that the economic literature anyway sees with the idea of knowledge. Now, the Quran is very, very different. First of all, only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has complete knowledge, knows absolutely everything. Again, in the economic paradigm, humans can know everything, which is very problematic. And it sets us up for a very challenging system. Knowledge in the Quran is also associated with truth. And it is associated with right and wrong. Truth about what we were just talking about. We're going back to now, in your mind, that worldview that I gave you. Truth about the nature of creation and its connections. The purposeful paths that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala placed in the universe. And you can't even count the infinite interdependencies between all of those elements. That is knowledge in the Quran. So knowledge in the Quran is not for me to know that this is water. Knowledge in the Quran is for me to basically take this first back to Allah and then to all the sources and then the fact that it's right here in front of me right now. That would be knowledge. What happened along the way? What were the connections that enabled this moment? It's those interdependencies, those relationships, and of course the nature of water that constitutes knowledge. When the Quran was revealed, obviously everybody knows Iqra. But he tells us, Niqra, with what name? Iqra bisma rabbika alladhi khalaq is very intense. Not any other name. He didn't say Iqra bisma ar-Rahman, which is the name that is the most popular. Or no, Iqra bisma rabbika alladhi khalaq. He is calling our attention to creation. He's calling our attention to the fact that this reading is going to be big. And it's not just going to be the written word. This reading is going to be everything that is going to be created. And he's drawing your attention to that sifa for that reason. The Quran also distinguishes between creation and discovery. And this is very important in the Quran because it is repeated. People cannot make something out of nothing. The Quran asks, were people created out of nothing? Were you yourself created out of nothing? Or did you create, or did they create? It also states, what have those other than Allah created? What have they created of the earth? Or do they have a share of the sky? Bring forth a book or any shred of evidence or knowledge, and if you are saying the truth. Knowledge in the Sunnah is also very substantial. And this is just some things that I pulled out of Bab al-Imama wa Shu'un al-Hukm from Salih al-Shani. So we're told, for instance, and these are just the meanings from the hadith. I'm not listing the hadith, that would take us forever. Knowledge is like rain, or it has the properties of rain. So if you think of the properties of rain, you can begin to understand what knowledge is. It quenches thirst. It fertilizes the soil. It gives comfort. It provides truths. It results in flourishing and beauty. And you can go on. And that is what the Qur'an and the Sunnah do for us. And this metaphor is also in the Qur'an, by the way. And the idea is to think, when Allah tells us it's like rain, what does that mean? You have to stop. And that's part of tadabbur al-Qur'an. No, stop there. Don't just read it and say, I know what that means. No. Stop and think, what exactly does that mean? Think of the extent of it. What is that telling me about knowledge? And what does that tell me about knowledge for humanity? Can anybody prevent the rain from falling on any part of Allah's earth? Of course not. And if you want to give rahmah, you give rain. So if you withhold knowledge, what are you withholding? Rahmah. We read also in the hadith, our deeds leave with our death except 3, and one of them is a knowledge utilized for the benefit of people. We read that the witness to knowledge should inform the absent. Knowledge can escape us if we do not operationalize it. That's a very important one. So you don't take knowledge and then do nothing with it. Above every knower is a knower. And of course, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is above all of us. Knowledge is the inheritance of humanity. Again, go back to the fact that knowledge is associated with truth. So it is the inheritance of humanity. No human has the right to monopolize knowledge. Knowledge in the definition of the Qur'an. And we're going to talk about that in a minute. Knowledge is to be obtained for Allah's pleasure. So again, this drive, this motivation that as an ummah we had in a lot of strength in the past. This should be revived. Whoever is asked about knowledge and keeps it a secret, Allah will harness him with a harness made of fire. The seriousness of withholding knowledge from those who need it. Whoever teaches people what is beneficial is prayed for by others. So again, spreading knowledge. And do as you know for the benefit of your affairs. And I like this one because it means that for every time, for every historical moment, there is an understanding of knowledge that befits our moment. And it will change and it will evolve. What we say today may not be the best of what is going to be said tomorrow, but it is the best for what we know today. So now let's define innovation. So innovation is basically when we take that knowledge to develop new ideas or products or services or methods. Another way of thinking of it is it's the application of human ingenuity through our intellect, our skills, and our capacities to raw materials, to products that already exist, to services that already exist, to ideas that already exist, to develop something new and useful. And here, the Islamic, or being Muslim, the believer, must add, it has to conform to ma'ruf, to morality. And this is something that doesn't exist in Western legal systems. So when we grant a patent, when we give intellectual property to something, we do not look for its truths. We do not look for its morality. So you can patent something that is immoral. And that, from the Islamic perspective, is problematic because there is this important measure of morality or ma'ruf or haqq. Okay, so that is something to keep in mind. This is a big difference between the two systems and something that, maybe in the future can be added to this idea of patenting so that we are not encouraging the types of innovations that are destructive. Right now, it's any innovation and it can be patentable, it can be protected, it can be copywritten, and we don't really think about the moral implications of what we are protecting, of what we are promoting. Right? And then finally, this type of innovation in the Islamic world shaped all kinds of innovation in the past. You have a lovely museum in Gulhan Park on the history of science and technology, the Istanbul Museum on the history of science and technology. And all of the innovators, inventors that you witness in that museum, for instance, had this starting premise of Tawheed. Now, the extent to which they utilized the knowledge of the Qur'an, this is contestable. When you go back and you look, of course, they look to other parts of the world and they drew on other philosophers and they drew on other inventors, but they started from that motivating factor, and they started from that fundamental truth, and la ilaha illallah. And if they're going to look at the Qur'an, if they're going to look at the universe, they are going to see unity. And in the museum, there's something beautiful. You will notice that there's a lot of focus on measurement and balance. There's so many instruments that Muslims put in effort because that was so important to their worldview. This honesty in trade, this honesty in measurement, and that comes from the Qur'an. Now, Dr. Jessa already explained in a nutshell the elements that we utilize. And for me, I take it down to the unit of the ayah. When reading an ayah or a set of ayat that concern a specific issue, it is very important to look at the 7 elements. So you're looking at the concepts. You want to understand what are the key concepts in this ayah or set of ayat. You're looking at the objectives. What are its purposes? What is it aiming to achieve? You're looking at the rules, if there are any, that are clear. I mean, some aren't clear, some are clear. You just see them there, do and don't, and it's, there's no argument. You're looking at the proofs. I'm going to give you examples of that in the next slide. You're looking at values. What are the values that are coming through? Is mercy the overriding value? Is justice the overriding value? Is generosity the overriding value? Is sternness the overriding value? You're looking at the universal laws. So what regulates what we're talking about? And finally, you're looking at the parties. And I know that in the book, they're called groups. I just find it easy to remember the elements through cover-up. It's just an easy way. Concepts, objectives, values, rules, universal laws, parties, proofs, cover-up. It's easy to remember. And for women, of course, cover-up is perfect. We have no issues with that. So now if we look at innovation in the Revelation, what do we see? Let's not cheat. Let's not cheat. I want to ask you, where do you see innovation in the Revelation? Anybody? Throw out a word that comes to your mind when you're thinking of the Qur'an. Where do you see innovation? Sorry? Values? No, I want you to give me an example of an innovation in the Qur'an. Give me an example. Okay, now this is not surprising because I went through this process as well. When I began studying the Qur'an for this reason, I was like, what innovation where in the Qur'an? What am I thinking? Oh, go ahead. We're going to cheat because he's part of MI. Just give me a word. يعني مش الآية كلمة that means there's innovation. Anything. Give me an invention in the Qur'an. Okay, so Dr. Azam is giving me an example of Allah's magnificence and grandeur. I'm talking about human. Yeah? Give me an example of an invention in the Quran that humans must have put together.
Boats in the sea.
Dr. Nine, what did he do? Okay, we're getting there. He built a wall. Shukran, mashallah. Okay, there's one right there. Exactly. The application of human ingenuity. This is invention in the Quran. So let's look at them. So examples. The Quran talks about ships and transportation vessels and lofty palaces and tents and mobile homes. It talks about armor and walls and pens. It even talks about institutional innovation. When we see Sayyidina Yusuf go and serve the king, there are institutional and many more institutional innovations that we see in family law, we see in inheritance. Those are institutional innovations. So the Quran is replete with innovations. And if we're looking at the 7 elements, and today there's no time for me to give you the different divisions of the ayat to have come up with this, but it's from cover to cover. So if we're looking at concepts, we would have to understand, as we spoke earlier, the meaning of knowledge, the meaning of enablement. We're going to talk about that in a moment, or taskhir. The meaning of ownership, benefit, balance, creation, endowment, and that comes from the Sunnah. It does not come from the Quran, but it's there, or waqf, prevention, or waqaya. The meaning of time. The meaning of time is very important when we're talking about innovation. When we're talking about values, we find that it is associated with mercy and gratitude and equity and universality. When we're talking about the rules associated with innovation, we're looking at, collective decision making, tangibility, usefulness, beneficial, accessible, universalized when just. That's a very important point, and especially important for people in law. The Quran makes a very clear point that just because something is universalizable doesn't mean we should universalize it. It is when something is just that it should be universalized. So when an innovation or an invention, it gives justice, then it should be universalized. When an agreement is just, it should be universalized. So it's not the fact that it has that quality, that it can be universalized, that it should be. It's justice that makes it something we should universalize. The universal laws include the fact that humans will always apply their ingenuity and effort, that there's purposefulness, again, that there's balance, and some of these will overlap, and that's fine. That there's corruption, but there's also rectification. We also read in the Quran that there's rejection. When you are coming up with something new or trying to do something new, like in the case of Sayyidina Nuh building the ship, his people were ridiculing him. Like, what are you doing? What is this? And this tells us that when we come up with something new, when we're applying our ingenuity in a specific way that is new to the people, or maybe not new to the people, but that's going to have a new purpose or has a new process, you are likely to be rejected. This is not something that's going to be accepted easily. And the Quran teaches us about that. It teaches us about how groups check each other's power. It tells us how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made the iron malleable so that we can protect ourselves from each other, unfortunately, not even from outsiders. And then, of course, when we're looking at the parties, we're looking at the masterminds or the innovators, we're looking at the enablers, the recipients who can be beneficiaries or they can be losers. We're looking at elements of wider governance and social systems. Like I said, there's a lot of talk of governance in the Quran. When we're looking at proofs, we're looking at the proofs of Allah and His mercy. Innovation and the capacity to innovate is considered one of Allah's proofs that He is merciful with humanity and how He made everything enabling. And that's just one of the proofs. There's many. So what makes innovation possible? There are four main things that I've identified, and you can add many, many more to this. The first that Allah draws our attention to in the Quran is the observation of phenomena. So He tells us, for instance, or we read that water flows carrying contaminants that are the product of combustion used for making adornments and other human desires. Now, I will emphasize that translation of the Quran is extremely important. If you do not have this translation, you will not see what I'm talking about. But the actual Arabic words do tell us that there are contaminants and it is because of combustion. And that is so advanced. I mean, that is something that we found out recently, but we're being told in the Quran that, and He's telling us the cause. He said, because you're making adornments and other things that you desire. So we also know why we're polluting, right? We also read, in the Quran, in did I put the A down? No, I didn't put the number, I didn't put it down. والسماء رفعها ووضع الميزان ألا تطغوا في الميزان وأقيموا الوزن بالقسط ولا تخسروا الميزان صح. So which basically means, and the sky He raised it and He placed a balance so that you may not transgress in the balance and maintain the weights with equity that you may not diminish the balance. Yes, I did put it right there. So think about what you're reading. He's telling you He raised the sky. He's telling you He placed a balance. He's telling you there's something in there that has weights. What do we know today? What does science tell us today? What do we know? We know that the atmosphere is measured by mass. And we know that certain elements have different proportions. And here He is telling us, be careful. Be careful that you diminish that balance, that you alter the measure of those elements so that the sky begins to close in on us and we're experiencing global warming, all of the greenhouse gases, because of our activities, because of this combustion, because of the fossil fuels. Now, this is reading the Quran with the eye of today. And that's how we have to read the Quran. And that's how we have to dig into the Arabic words and understand the connotations. Arabic is very wide and it's very rich. So again, so observe phenomena and base your innovations on that. Number two, observation of Allah's design. And Allah's design, not just in the visual. So how did they perfect ships? They studied whales. How did they perfect aircraft? They studied birds. You know, and he's telling us in the Quran, look at the sky, study the sun, study the bees. The honeybee is giving humans decision-making models. And it's absolutely crazy. Please, bees drive me nuts because you have to really go back to the literature. 60 years of literature on how the honeybee can teach humans how to make better decisions. SubhanAllah. And that's like Western scientific, you know, whatever you want to call it, if you think that's more valuable and more credible. Those are the headlines. Honeybees can teach humans how to make better decisions. Do you know what shura means? The literal meaning of shura, which means the extraction of honey from its source. This is what shura literally means. So Allah is telling us, perform shura, which is how you take decisions, and then He's telling us it's from the honeybee, so that we go and we study the honeybee and we learn how to make better decisions. The Quran is absolutely crazy, and if I was melting before this lecture, I'm going to be gone by the end. It is so exciting, and you have to get excited because there's nothing like it. Number 3, observation of previous innovations. So Allah tells us, look at the ships, look at the buildings. He tells us, look at the pillars, look at what those before you have built. They built much more than you built. So look at what they built and compare. Are you building like them? Do you even want to build like them? And the moral is always higher in the Quran than the physical achievement. So it's not that there was a problem that Iram had the highest pillars or the biggest pillars. That's not the problem. The problem is that they became immoral. The problem is that it was not complemented with, you know, a moral way of life, a socially viable way of life. They lost the connections that these innovations must be accompanied with if you are going to survive them. And finally, and the concept that absolutely blows my mind, which is the magnificent and merciful concept of taskhir. And this is presented in several ayat. An idea of taskhir, and in the translation is so wrong, and it upsets me so much when we read in a translation that musakhara or sakhara is made subservient to us or subordinated to us. That is such a wrong translation. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says He sakhara shams. Is the sun subordinated to us? Of course not. Is the moon subordinated to us? Are the stars subordinated to us? Are they subservient to humans? No. But He created them in such a way that we could utilize their purposefulness. We could understand their purposeful paths. We can understand what they're supposed to be doing for us. And they don't have one purpose, they have multiple purposes. You know, the sun has a major purpose, but the first purpose is to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and then the second is to provide heat, and the third is to provide light, and the fourth is for us to figure out how to have solar energy. And so there's many purposes. So this concept of taskhir has to be thought of in terms of facilitation, has to be thought of in terms of enablement. The way that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala designed the universe was to enable humans to be innovative. And of course, there's so many examples, and we don't have to go through all of them. I can, you have this presentation if you want it. But there's so many areas that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala pushes us to see what is musakhar, how it is musakhar, and why it is musakhar. Now, I wasn't going to put this slide in, but I decided to because gaining knowledge and moving in this direction, particularly from the Quran, I wanted to show you what my view of what it does, and hopefully in our institute, what it does with your mind. So there are two axes, as you can see. One is actuality, and the other is authenticity. So if you are the most shallow person on earth, just self-serving, you're going to be in the quadrant of your reality. You're not even going to be in your truth. It's just going to be the reality in which you live, and that's the end of it. If you're a bit more generous, you're going to have a truth. You're going to have some moral values. Now, if you want to move towards Allah's truth, subhanahu wa ta'ala, when He teaches us, you have to go up the diagonal. So you have to move your reality from the reality to the reality that exists. That, go out in the streets and find out what people are doing and understand society and understand how innovation is happening. That is reality, not your reality, but a broader reality. And move your truth up towards the truth of the Qur'an and the Sunnah. And as you move on the diagonal, you are effectively objectivizing your cognition. You are training yourself to step outside of yourself. You're pushing your limits towards a higher truth and a stronger reality. And that's hopefully what this methodology will do. Nobody is going to move up into the top quadrant. Absolutely nobody. It's impossible. That truth is for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala only. And nobody will move up completely into the reality quadrant, because that's absolutely impossible. Reality is way too complex. But you can move your reality up, and you can move your truth up so that you are in the tajdeed, the renewal zone, so that you're understanding enough of reality and understanding enough of the revelation to be able to effect real and authentic change for yourself and for this ummah. My final slide is based on the nature of guidance associated with this divine mercy of being able to innovate and to discover and to develop. And the first is that innovation capability, even needs, do not mean that we can derail the purposefulness of creation. And that is part of the problem of the nature of human beings. They are in a rush, they don't take their time, and we're not learning. We see something and we don't take our time to discover what was its purpose in its original state. What was it supposed to serve? That doesn't mean that we cannot recombine. We spent all of today talking about, all this lecture, talking about how we can recombine knowledge and recombine elements. But we first have to understand what we're disrupting. Because maybe in understanding what we're disrupting, we will find that fixing that is preferable to coming up with something new. So we cannot destroy connectivity. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in the Qur'an, we cannot sever what He has commanded to be joined. And when you think that everything is connected, this becomes a challenge. We have to look at connectivity. Now, what are we, when we make a cell phone and you sit in a restaurant and you see couples, young couples, everybody's holding their phone. Nobody's talking to anybody. It's what they're doing. We've created a technology that's disruptive to families, disruptive to relationships. Does that mean that technology itself is bad? We should not produce it? Of course not. But it means that with it, we have to have a social program of education, of awareness, of love, of mercy, of respect, that when we are out to dinner, the phones are in our bags and they do not come out unless you're some kind of surgeon and someone's going to die if you don't attend to them, right? So that has to accompany our inventions and innovations. We cannot corrupt wholeness. I mean, we have to understand that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, again, this goes maybe to the designer babies, or it goes to this incredible trend now of cosmetic surgeries and of defacing parks and forests. And so we cannot corrupt wholeness through this process. We must understand what innovation, as I said, means for moral and material connectivity. We must innovate to protect Allah's order. It's not innovation for the sake of innovation for Muslims. It's innovation to protect Allah's order. And in order to protect Allah's order, we have to first understand it. And then as a final note, we have to distinguish between what we can subject to commercial interests and what must be shared with humanity irrespective. Shukran.
MashaAllah. Okay, so any questions or comments, please? So this is something that has blown everybody's minds. You gave me tough questions.
Nobody has, I have.
Oh, right.
In the last diagram, we used the words reality and truth. What are the words for that?
I would say the actuality is the waqa for the actuality, the reality, al-waqa. And the authenticity would be al-haq.
Okay, what about truth and reality?
Oh, sorry, I mean, for me, the English, they're interchangeable.
Okay.
But the authenticity, you see, I'm not going to say that Allah is authentic, but humans move on a spectrum of authenticity. As you improve your truth, you move on that spectrum of authenticity. But it's a component of it. It's just we don't, it's just a way of, describing when you become more truthful, you become more authentic.
Okay. And to be frankly, your interpretation of Alaq and the independence was gorgeous and inspiring. But
I'm waiting for the but still Allah yahfazak, it's okay.
And you said you cannot be independent,
yes,
fully independent.
Right.
But do you think that we should look for independence more and more, even though being aware of that we can't be independent fully or perfectly? So shortly, do you think that independence is something worthy to seek for?
Independence, you mean?
Yeah.
No, I don't think that independence is something worthy of seeking. And I'm not talking about acts like, should I put my socks away or should I wash the dishes? I'm not talking about that. We're talking about, should I seek independence as a way of life? And the answer is no, because in Islam, first of all, not only will you not reach it, but if you have that mindset, then you do not fully understand the system that's in place that gives you your food, and the system that's in place that gave you love and nurtured you, and the system that's in place that would ultimately protect you if you needed it. You are dismissing so many so many systems that are fundamental to human well-being. And what would be your goal to strive for independence? You don't want your mom to call you? Tell her to call you less. But what would be your goal in wanting to be like that? As opposed to understanding that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created you in this world as an interdependent being, and whether we like it or not, imposed duties upon us because of that interdependence. This is a short life, my dear friends. And we may not like the duties that are imposed upon us because of this interdependence. And not duties just towards our family, but to extended family, to neighbors, to community, to nation, to animals, to plants. We may not appreciate those duties, but in performing those duties, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala promises us there's so much more reward in this life, not even in the life to come. The world that we create through that interdependence and connection is so much more beautiful than the world that we create when we strive for that independent individualism.
Thank you, but I want to say something more. Your example is more based on the interpersonal and personal examples. Mm-hmm. But I mean independence by more structural independence.
Yeah.
Free from the, let's say, social pressure, maybe the state and the global capitalism, maybe. So I mean the independence in that sense. So
okay,
not free from the family and free from your mother and your father.
I do not necessarily view that as independent. You see, the thing is, and I'm a very real pragmatic person in this way. Can you become independent of those factors without restructuring and becoming more interdependent and intradependent with your immediate surroundings? You cannot. Unless we rethink our families and our communities and how we support each other and how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala intended for us to support each other, not only through the internal compensation system in Islam and the inheritance system in Islam and the caregiving system in Islam, unless we do that, we cannot possibly step out of or create a parallel world to the capitalism or whatever world that you would like to become independent of. So yes, if you that to me is not independence. It's that to me is changing the system that within which you live. That's why that would not occur to me.
Well, I'd like to ask you.
Yeah, you're allowed to ask a question, of course.
Just to build on.
Thank you very much, first of all, Professor, for your fascinating presentation. Just to build on this, what distinction do you see between independence, individualism, and autonomy?
Independence is your false belief that you can break free of certain connections, and particularly the connections that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created. Individualism is who you are. That you are an individual, you will be responsible as an individual. Your duties are as an individual. Individualism is different than independence. I can be an individual, but I'm certainly not independent. I mean, an individual still requires to eat, still requires to perform their duties, is still responsible in dunya and akhirah, and will be treated as an individual in akhirah. So individualism is very much a part of our creed and our belief system, but not independence. They're two different things. Autonomy is the ability of the individual to make decisions. Now, and this is the caveat, those decisions as believers are not free of Allah's revelation and guidance. So if I'm an autonomous being, what defines autonomy in Islam? Autonomy in Islam is defined as your ability to live your life in a way that rules life rather than life ruling you. And how do you do that? You have to internalize the message. When you internalize the message, what forms at your core is what you spontaneously reproduce in the world. And when you do that, you are an autonomous being. You're not only that, in the words of Sheikh Muhammad Abdullah Draz, you have fused your will with the will of your Creator. Because you've taken in His revelation, you've questioned it, understood it, you've ingrained it in yourself. And then you spontaneously reproduce it with your skills, your capacity, your resources. And in doing so, you are autonomous. So you are both the subject of the law, as he says, but you are also a legislator of the law. Because the law is only the starting point. The law in Islam is not the end point. It cannot be. I can again, and I give you a small example. If I tell you you cannot steal, and this is like a far-fetched example, but it gives you an example. We know we all can't steal, right? But if you're in front of a shop and it has a bottle of water, and it's the last bottle of water, and someone is really thirsty and they're about to die, what are you going to do? You're going to break the glass, you're going to get the water, and you're going to give it to them. So I have a rule that I'm not supposed to steal. But what happens to that rule in that context? Because I've internalized bigger, deeper, more complex meanings, I'm not going to stand there and say, well, I can't steal, and watch the person pass away. I'm not even going to think of it as stealing. That's autonomy. I'm autonomous. So it's not the law that is ruling me as the law is outside me. The law is helping me become autonomous. It's helping me manage the world rather than allow the world to manage me. That is the difference between independence, individuality, and autonomy. I feel like I'm in a PhD defense.
But it seems that at the day of judgment, we have independent, we are independently judged.
Individually judged.
Individually.
Even then, we're not independently judged. We're individually judged. Because even then, God forbid, if you sanit sunnah hasana, then you will get the benefits. And if you have sinned, so you're not even, it's not independence, just individualism. You will carry the individual, weight. But it's not independent. It's not independent of what you did in the world.
But if others they made a mistake, also you're now.
Yeah, 100%. But I'm just saying you're not cut off.
You benefit from the consequences of your work.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for your interesting lecture. I think you have really raised a really important issue in here, speaking about that no one is actually 100% independent, and that everything, and we are all as a global society, we're interconnected. And this kind of what should I call it, personal reading of the Qur'an and so many modern meanings. Because I'm watching the process in my country, how it's going, and I'm from Russia, and there is really a problem. People think that if we are reading Qur'an in a new way and offering the practical application of some things, it means we are kind of crossing out all the tradition, or we're doing the bid'ah and so on. So some professors and scholars are mentioning it's sometimes it's easier for Muslims to find the central point, some cross lines between Christians, Muslims, and other religions than within the Muslim Ummah. because people are just like not even able to sit at the same table, like they're not listening to each other. But I wanted to ask, what do you see as a possible solution, or not even like maybe a solution, I should put like variants of how we could interconnect with each other in what ways? So should it be like conferences, or should be like some kind of other projects? What could we offer so that people could finally understand that we could reinterpret constantly the text of the Quran, and it doesn't mean we're doing bid'ah or that we are like canceling all the previous tradition or the experience of ulama and so on. Like, what do you see as a possible way? How could we like raise the awareness about this one? Thank you.
May I add something to this question, because I was considering to ask something related with it. And how do you place the tradition in this innovative method? Because when I listen to lectures, sometimes I feel like, okay, you need to get some tools like language, and you have the source like Quran and Hadith. So I feel like and also I'm the member of the modern group, so like jump the tradition a bit and then just try to like manage or like try to say something new maybe. Mm-hmm. So I was just considering what is the position of the tradition in your suggestion?
Well, the first word that just jumps into my head really big is respect. Okay, there has to be respect. Respect for our tradition, respect for our heritage, and there has to be a knowledge of it. We have to be knowledgeable. But when we go back to tradition and we don't find answers, or what I found more inhibiting is we find that they placed artificial limits on their analysis or understanding of the Qur'an. So if, for instance, I look at fiqh, they dealt mostly with ayat al-ahkam. They dealt mostly with the ayat of rulings, whether we're looking at the Qur'an or whether we're looking at the sunnah. That's not going to help me in a study on innovation. And so when I go back to the literature, what I find is halal and haram. So I'll be looking for something specific on a specific invention or innovation or a specific policy, like I said, intellectual property, because that's the area that I'm specialized in. So I went back to see, well, what does the Qur'an have to say about intellectual property? What do the fuqaha have to say about it? So when I looked historically, and it doesn't go back very far because intellectual property is a new policy tool. And what you end up with is it's halal, or it's haram, or Islam has nothing to do with it because it didn't exist when Islam started. Or there's a fourth position, which is it's halal, haram, has nothing to do with it. That makes it halal. No, there's a fourth different argument. The point is, that tells me nothing about innovation. It tells me nothing about the nature of knowledge. And so the idea is to respect what's there, to acknowledge what's there, and then say, okay, we need to go beyond this because we have new challenges. I'll give you another example that I'm working on, and I was told not to mention the position of women. So I'm not going to mention the position of women. I'm just going to say something very small, which is when we're looking at and I'm not going to name the convention or the agreement. We're just going to say there's an international agreement on women that's controversial. If we look at traditional fiqh, we can find arguments that support everything in that agreement, believe it or not. From centuries ago, from Syria and Iraq and from the different madhahib. If we look at those that support it, if we look at those who rejected it, it also all comes from the toolkit of fiqh. Then the question becomes, and this is where a methodology like this is very important, is that what we want to do in the world? Is this our ummah? That someone gives us something and we either agree with it or disagree with it. Okay, so we disagree with it, then what? What do we have to offer? And this comes here, you'll have conferences and discuss. So what do we have to offer that takes us beyond the yes, we're rejecting, or no, no, we're rejecting, or yes, we're supporting? We go back and we realize that there's a different worldview in the Quran. Like I said, ba'dukum min ba'd. It is not a conflictual, men against women, and we can't even in the Islamic sense, and I was explaining this to my colleagues, Islamically speaking, we can't even start from the premise of injustice. That is not a premise for Muslims. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, He does not He did not put us in a state of injustice. He does not create us in injustice. So I cannot approach the revelation from the pivot of injustice. I have to read the revelation and understand what it's telling me about the relationship between men and women and the position of women and how we operate in communities and how it talks to me as a woman and how it talks about me. So it's not enough for us to stop at the traditional fiqh and shy away because it's pronounced this or that. We have to say, how can we go back to being the leaders of humanity? How can we go back to saying this is not working, that we can propose something that is better for women, better for men, better for children, better for our societies, and not just our societies. There's something about Islam that is beautiful. Islam is not just for Muslims. The Aqidah part is for Muslims. You pray, you fast, that's for Muslims. But the sunnan is for all of humanity. The values are for all of humanity. You know, when people say to me, well, you know, this idea of, you know, there's no premarital relationships, that's religious. No, that's not just religious. That's for all of humanity. That is in the best interest of everybody. And if you go back to the studies on, you know, these marital relationships and not to go into those relationships pre-marriage, you will find that the non-religious literature has reached the conclusion that that is best for family and that is best for individual well-being. So the Qur'an speaks truths for humanity. You don't have to believe for us to convince people that what is on the table is best for everybody. We just have to find the evidence and the modes of persuasion and have the respect for everybody and take what's truthful from everybody and then build upon it the rest of the truths that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has provided us with. أقول قولي هذا واستغفر لي ولكم. We're good, right?
Yeah.
Okay. ما استخدمنا خلاص يا ليش؟
Sorry, my mind got stuck in the issue of independence, but I would like to hear your opinion or comment on the issue of in the Sufi traditions, the tak dunya, and which means, I don't know how to translate it into English, but maybe renunciation of the world. And do you think that is it kind of seeking for the independence? You know, it has 4 stages for renunciations. At the end of the day, if you become accustomed to living renunciation, you have to live as well. So, do you think that it's a kind of seeking for independence?
I'll make it very easy for you. In that journey, are you independent? Or are you more and more dependent on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? It's a journey of dependence. You're just changing the balance of your dependencies.
Yeah, in that journey, al-hurriya or liberty is actually slavery to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We're going to get into tasawwuf. Al-hurriya and tasawwuf is defined as ubudiyya lillah. So the more you have ubudiyya lillah, the more you have hurriya from ghayrillah, from other than Allah. And that's
free from other things but Allah.
Exactly. So
you're increasing your dependence.
The more you free yourselves from the dunya, the more you enslave yourself to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because you cannot really free yourself from both. Yeah.
Maybe if I add to this one, you're discovering more and more why you're interdependent. I mean, when every single element in this cone and this creation interact with you, so it is the ultimate discovery of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala magnificence all around you. So it is not freedom from that point of view, but it is like you see Allah's jalal in everything around you and Allah's bounty.
Okay, so I guess we should close with this now. Thank you very much, subhanAllah. So we invite everyone to maybe connect with us, connect with our speakers. Visit our website, maqasid.org. Just connect with our wonderful scholars here as well.
If I may, yes, please. Just a quick intervention. To connect with our scholars here, I didn't introduce each and every one. Yeah. Each and every one of our fellows here of the Maqasid Institute are coming from somewhere in the world and from somewhere in the intellectual space. We have Brother Mujahid, who is an imam and a scholar of the fiqh and sharia in his own right. We have Dr. Mu'taz al-Zahir from Jordan, who has a PhD, defending soon, in Quranic hermeneutics and working on the issues of tafsir and the relationship with language at quite a high level. We have Dr. Azzam Abu Rayash, also from Palestine, Canada, who is actually working on a fiqh for the environment, whose PhD is sustainable environments and sustainable cities, and he's trying to have a fiqh, develop a fiqh for that from the Islamic point of view. We have Dr. Mawlud Muhadi, who is also Muhadi, who is also specialized in Islamic thought and
civilization.
And Islamic civilization especially, and his contribution to that in his PhD was quite interesting. We have brother or doctor very soon, inshallah, Abdul Qarnayn Haidar from India, who is also specialized in issues of fiqh and sharia and ijtihad, and combined with leadership
and social science
and social sciences and sociology and so on. We have brother Paul Galloway, who is our communication director and media outreach, whose specialization is in that area, in communication, and teaching us how to deal with the media and so on. And we have Dr. Jasmine Omarchich. Okay. Excuse me. So Dr. Jasmine, always telling Dr. Jasmine, another PhD in social sciences, sociology, economics, and so on, and teaching in the International Islamic University of Malaysia. Another professor from the International Islamic University of Malaysia, Brother Baptiste Brudar, who is a Swiss and teaching in Malaysia and doing research in Colombia, and speaking, I don't know, a dozen languages. And we have a brother Hassan Sharif Banna from our board. He's actually our board member and one of the founders of this center in the time, applying the methodology in his own way in a number of initiatives in different parts of the world. Look at his bio and then ask him about any of his many hats. And we have Dr. Zaid Barzenji, who is actually our executive director and one of the founders of this center. And finally, we have we have brother who is also one of our executive team and in charge of more and more of the execution of this project and the thinking and strategizing for it due to his background in strategy. And we have finally, but not least, Dr. Idus Rafiqov from, again, all sorts of connections.
In other words, we came with the United Nations.
We came with the United Nations. From Kazan to Malaysia, now in Istanbul, establishing our research here. So these are our fellows, most of them actually, who are working on the Maqasid Institute project. We would like to have students of knowledge interact with us. We'll be more than happy to hold seminars with you when we are in Turkey, and your students who are in any of our interests, go to maqasid.org and subscribe to our Maqasid Research Network, and let's see how we can cooperate on issues of research from the Islamic perspective.
And thank you all very much. Really, thank you on our behalf.
Thank you very much.